Okay. I'd like to add another point to what we discussed last week. We pointed out that the Rav ben Rambam says the Ika Mechira of Bita Lioma is for the purpose of Yud. We discussed then that's the pshat the posuk in War Be'inei Neho. So if the Odon decides not to miyayid, so Mela, it kicks in a mitzvah opinion by the father, because it's not a mitzvah. I saw something in Minchas Chinuch, which I'll talk about in a second. I was just wondering the following: that if the Ika mitzvah of the Ika heta mechira is for Yud of a Amivriya, the question is, can a woman own an Amivriya? Can she buy an Amivriya? So you would say, hey, Pura, of course not. She can't marry. But the din is that an Odoin who is not roy to Mekadesh because of Erva, to Mekadesh the Omavri, he could buy her because his son on the tzad, that his son could do Yiyud. So the question is, can a woman buy an Omavriya that her son should be Miyayid the Omavri? And Minchas Chinuch takes it as a double portion that she can. In Mitzvah Mem Gimel, Ois Aleph, Vihine Kosav Liel, the Omen Nib Keres Li Yisrael. V'nir li poshet tiyochol limko gam kein li isha. The isha eino koina eved ki mipnei chshad avol omo loma lo tikna, because there's no chshad between the woman and her omo. He didn't find it, but he didn't find the opposite. Is there poshet etzli? V'i de'enu really yiyud. She's not going to yiyud. Homavur b'shas v'rambam ulekam bez Hashem izloch di'afteinu roy la'atzmoi im really yiyud lebenoi nimkeres v'hoch really yiyud lebeno im aben oisa shliach the isha nasa shliach moish v'kan gizeres akosim the ochel l'kacheloi oy lebenoi mali isha mali isha. He would the Chol Yayid Libno Hagodol B'Yishus like he was nighty. Cheni with the Rav Machaber Shekol Kol Din Yud B'Chulei in Mitzachazeh Yipin B'Loi Kosav the Noi B'Schom Daft. I was only wondering that it's not father and son, but that the son in Yud is Kom Tachtov. He basically is a Gava Bachikoi. He's in the place of his father. That's the Gemara Kiddushin, Yud Zayin Amid Beis. Mar ba'ani es habein shekein Kom Tachas Oviv liado l'stei achuza. So I could have imagined that Kom Tachtov was said only in a relationship of Ben and Av, that the Ben is Kom Tachtov the Av, Shukar Davur. V'lo b'ben hayoyish imo. But then you could assume, not like the Minchas Chinuch, that it takes a double portion. I thought it's an interesting question. I'm not being machri anything. I thought that the issue was very interesting, especially in light of the fact that the chefsa of mechiras bita leomo is only because of you. Now, I'd like to discuss. I just to go back to the mitzvah of every k'naini. To recall, is a din and is a shrano, is a sibui, sheino muchlot. And we pointed out in Mishnah Torah that maybe the Rambam is chayzer and holds the Olam Tavodu is a sibui muchlot. And Protei Mitzvah says la'avoid be'avidivri l'olam. And even in the Minyan HaKotzer, it sounds that he might have been chayzer. La'avoid be'avidivri l'olam k'na'ni l'olam shem l'olam tavodu. So in Mishnah Torah, it's mashma mitzvah muchletes, and in Sefer and all the Minyan HaKotzer, but in Sefer Mitzvos, it's very clear that it's a shrano, that it's a mitzvah shein muchletes. It's a din. And derech klal, the Rambam Protei Mitzvos, when it's a shrano, he writes that it's a din, and in the Minyan HaKotzer, he writes lodun or liyos, and here in both of them he writes it as a verb, infinitive. Okay, now we pointed out that the Rambam Mishnah Torah proper in halachos does not mention the word mitzvah at all, only the Isa. And I pointed out that I mentioned that this is a very important yisod, if it's correct, that the Protei Mitzvos is not kibu a separate chibur that the Rambam wants to just make sure that he has all the mitzvahs inside, but the Protei Mitzvos part of halachos, as he seems to say, the Yavaya mitzvah, and this is the mitzvah, and we're going to Mavaya it. Now, I asked last week, I think, that the Ram says a very strange lashon. And he compares two things that it's almost like comparing apples to bananas. V'chein also liodom l'shachre eved k'na'ni, he compares it to the Isa Drabonon of an Isha to be Kohen Avodim. And one is clearly the Raisa, and one is clearly the Rabbonon. The Rambam Perek Tes, Vilchos Avodim Aloch Habo, or Isha Kohen Shvachos, V'eino Kohen Avodim. Afilu Kitanim, V'bnei Achshad, V'im Konsa Oisam, Harizeh Konsa Gufam Kish. She's not allowed to buy, but if she bought, but it's only Darbonon, Achshad. V'yuli, She'ein Asur Liknois Ele Eved Ben Tes Shonim Umitesha Ulamayla. V'chein also, she's only yearly that if the Eved is less than 9, he can buy it. She can buy it. V'chein also la'odom l'shachre eved k'na'ni. So what's the v'chein? The Isa of an Isha for an Eved is only chshad. The Isa of a shachre Eved is a deraisa. V'chol m'shachre oive v'yaseh. Shneim b'loim tavodu. So I was wondering, that the v'chein in the Rambam is not in the etzem din, that one is the Rabban and one's the Deraisa. But the fact that there are differences, that sometimes it's mutter and sometimes it's asa, that's the v'chein. Ho'isha koine shvachos v'eino koine avodim. V'im konav v'yuli she'eino asura el liknois eved ben tesha shana v'yam. But there are some cases that she should put them in koine eved. Similarly, v'chein asa le'oda l'shachre eved k'na'ni v'chol v'shachre eved b'aseh shneim olam tavodu v'im shicho meshura b'chulei u'mutter l'shachre l'dvar mitzvah afilu mitzvah shel devreim. V'chein shivcha shehoyu om noegi bo minig hefker hari hi michshol lechatoyim koifin es rabo u'mishachacho kedei shetinose yose michshol. See, even though this was a deraisa, but there are sometimes that it's mutter, sometimes also maybe that is the explanation of the v'chein. Now, let's go slowly. The Gemara in Gittin clearly says there's a heter lamed chesed mit beis gufa. Omer Yehuda Omer Shmuel kol ha-meshachre avdoi over b'aseh shene'emar le'olam b'hem tavodu. Meisvei Maaseh b'Rav Eliezer shenichnas lebeis ha-knesses v'lo motza asoro v'shichrer avdoi v'shlimol asoro mitzvah shiny. So Moses mitzvah shiny doesn't explain why. We should ask, point to the Rambam. We'll see other Rishonim what they do. The Rambam l'cheir here is clear in Sefer Mitzvos. He says the over b'aseh. So what's the heter? L'tzorech mitzvah. Nechuk, there is a machlokes Rishonim. I mentioned this last week. I'm not sure. The Rosh in Brochos in Perek Zayin Siman Chof is of the opinion that the heter is because of Tchiyah. That the Aseh, the Rabbim, or whatever the Aseh is, it's Deicha the Isa Aseh of Shicho. And there's a mitzvah deraisa in Shicho Eved of Mitashi B'Serech B'nei Yisrael to be mashlim amin. The Ramban, right over here in the Asagas Ramban, in this mitzvah, says Lefi Daiti Sheshtei mitzvah saying we'll get back to that mitzvah Shem later. Shenistavinu shenavoy b'kna'ni l'olam for nishachre oisei b'chinom without a gain. And this he says also in the Chusha Rambanigi. Lamed Ches Amid Beis Diva Amaschol Hodeh Aminim Shiny in his first answer that the Isa is to give the Eved K'na'ni Matnas Chinam, and therefore any place, any situation where there's no Chanina, where it's not a freebie, a free gift to the Eved, there is a heter. And in this case, in the case of is it tzorech harav l'kayim a mitzvah d'rabbanan. There's no the Rambam. It's very difficult. We don't know. There's no hachat the Rambam to say that the heter is because of tchiyah, and we don't know that it's because of because of chinam. But maybe the Rambam's opinion is that in the Shirana, a mitzvah she'eno echrechis, or a mitzvah that's not muchletes, it's tzibur she'en muchlet, you could be matir even b'mokay mitzvah. And that's the heta. Even if you assume this, one should definitely understand there's a difference between shicha in shein v'ayin and shicha in a case of a mitzvah. Because shicha and shein v'ayin, that's gufa the way the din of K'nani was formulated. That the mitzvah of tavodu was only formulated in as much as there was no shein v'ayin. But once the shein v'ayin, adarabah, the din says that it should be shachar. In the case of a mokah mitzvah, to mekayim a mitzvah, the mashal mini, whatever it is, that's nothing to do. That's a separate heta. Even though there is a l'olam tavodu, we say that you don't have to mekayim the l'olam tavodu in this case. I found in the Ran on the Rif in Gittin, Tav Chofam Beis, he seems to say something like I wanted to suggest. In Divrei HaMaschil, call him Meshachra Avdod, Oiva Basei, he says the following. Mashma, the lav Aseh Gomu. It's not an Aseh Gomu. The Gemara Pachidin, Meisvei, Maise Rebbe Eliezer, Shlich the Beis Knesset, V'lei Motza Shom Asoro, V'Shichra Avda, V'Shil Asoro, M'Fakinon, Mitzvah Shiny, V'i Aseh Gomo, who Heichit Achiden, Aseh Shebetera Mishum Hai Mitzvah. So if you didn't add the word Aseh Shebatera, I would have said he's saying exactly what I'm saying. But since he says, I'm not sure Gomer means Aseh Gomer, I don't understand Mother Shachs. I thought, what is it? I say Gomer Natera and Aseh She'eno Gomer. It's a Darabon, so it really is not an Aseh. So I'm not sure what he's saying. But what I wanted to suggest that there might be a separate heta in Shirana. If it's true, it's very important. However, this is very nice in Sefer HaMitzvos. However, in Mishnah Torah, what the Rambam's opinion is that it isn't Aseh Gomer, it's a Tzivui Muchot. So what's the heta? And the Ram says in Mishnah Torah, which he hasn't said in another place, he says this heta of shicha l'tzorach mitzvah is even a mitzvah rabon. The Ram Perek Tes because avodim alochavo says the following: B'chein osel liodom l'shachre eved k'na'ni b'chol meshachre eved b'asei shneim alon ben tavod. וכולי, ומותר לשחרר דבר מצווה, אפילו מצווה רבון של דבריהם, אפילו מצווה של דבריהם, כגון שלא היו עשור. בבייס הכנסת, הרי זה בשחרר עבדו, ומשלם בוי המניין, וכן כוח יצבר, וכן שפחה שנויגה בו, העם מנהג הפקר, הרי היא מכשול, לחייתם, כיפנס רבו, ומשחרר, כדי שתנוסה, so this is a problem because the Rosh's business doesn't apply. He says clearly that it's mitzvah rabbanon. He can't say that the asay the rabbanon is doiche the isa deraisa of also the shachar avda. K'na'ni. Then also, to suggest, like the Ramban, that the problem is chinom, if you look at the Ramban's mashma, any situation which is chinum is mutter. It's not these peculiar cases and those, these, that like, the Rambam, you get the impression there are two paradigms. And anything like these two paradigms, you mutter, and there's no common denominator between two paradigms. According to the Ramban, it's all one din, that it's not chinam. Listen to the Lashon of the Rambam again. So I'm not sure exactly how to learn it. He says like this. Umutter the shachar l'dvar mitzvah fil mitzvah shel devrei kagoin shelo hoya asov besikneses how is a shachar avdoi umashnu boy haminyan chen koyitz v'chein kokyitz bezeh mitzvah devrei v'chein shivcha shenoige bo moom minig hefka hari umichsho imichsho l'chaytim kayfen esrabo b'shachar kedei shinose v'yoseh amichsho v'chein kokyitz bezeh. So the two paradigms, there's mitzvah and michsho, and those are the two cases. How they're matter and isa deraisa, especially if it's a mitzvah muchletes, it's an amal, I have no clue. The Ramban is mashim when he talks about this in Gittin, that they're all really one case, and it's not chinam. There's a reason for it. Now, I'd like to touch on the Ramban over here in the Hasogas. Let's go through it. We'll try to go through it carefully. First, before we even touch on the words, the Ramban over here clearly says that there are two mitzvahs. He's adding a new mitzvah. The Hasogas are usually not because he disagrees with the definition of the Mishnah. That's not his purpose over here. The Ramban is dealing with the minyan. And according to Ramban, there are not one mitzvah here, but two mitzvahs. The mitzvah of tavodu and a mitzvah of shicha of b'mokum shein v'ayin. And not only that, it's not only that he's mentioned Hasogas, it's clear in the mitzvahs where he talks at the end of Sefer HaMitzvos, where he discusses the mitzvahs Shesila Karab and what he's moised, what he's masalik, what he throws out of the cheshbon, and what he adds a mitzvah of Shicha Eved K'nani B'Yitzias Shein V'Ayin. And the Ram says that it's not a separate mitzvah, it's a shiur in the mitzvah of l'olam ben tavod. And he writes like this. אבל העניין הזה הוא דין מן הדינים, שנצטווינו לשלם לעבד כנעני, שיחרא גופוי בדמי עינוי. That it's a payoff. He's paying for the shein v'ayin with the shichra. We have to ask ourselves, first of all, is he trying to explain then, therefore, that really there's no problem of l'olam tavodu because it's not chinam? אבל העניין הזה הוא דין מן הדין Shestivinu l'shalem li'eved k'nani shichro gufoi b'dmei einoi b'shinoi meis omdoi im ba'olo b'bezdin yishachro yosei kitashlume. I think it says bitashlume. I would assume it's kitashlume. I don't know. I think kitashlume is better. Tashlume hanezik umikol mokoim mitzvah b'fnei atzmo timne kechol adinim shemona rav v'goyin mitzvahs gerushin. So from all the mitzvahs that he claims that are dinim, he says gerushin. And shichro eved b'shem ba'ayin is like the mitzvah of gerushin, and they're both dinim. And l'chera, the comparison to gerushin. So I'm just wondering why he is working with both. That ki'ilu, the same way the mitzvah of gerushin is to mafkia the kiddushin, the mitzvah of shichro and shein v'ayin is to mafkia the avdus. He's trying to make an equation. The mitzvah is to mafkia the mitzvah before. There was a mitzvah kiddushin, and to mafkia the gerush is to mafkia the kiddushin on the suin. And in shicho, the mitzvah is to mafkia the avdus. And the chiddush is maybe you can have a mitzvah in a minyan which is antithetical to the mitzvah. Another mitzvah, the mitzvah kiddushin and gerushin antithetical. And in some cases, there can be a mitzvah to mafkia the kiddushin, shichro, and l'olam tavodu, or antithetical. And in some cases, there's a mitzvah to be mafkia the l'olam tavodu. L'olam tavodu probably means not to work with him in the Mitzvas, but it means that he's meshubed, and the shichro is mafkia the shibud. And the Ramban then adds something very interesting, that the mitzvah is a knas. The shichra eved is a knas in the case of Shevaim. Avol loisale al daitcho bi'omri shehi mitzvah shehi abailov mitzubalo itziu lecherus ba'pilu eshinoi oi achre hashchiso es eino. It's not immediately when he knocks out the eye or the tooth. Shahari ba'al ha'kabola l'matiki ha'shmua oimrim shu knas v'ein b'mitzvas aseh. Now it's a very important thing he's doing. And it'll be important over here and be important globally. V'ein b'mitzvas aseh knas. V'ein b'mitzvas aseh knas, a very strange phrase. It is a mitzvah. So the ain't mitzvah say knas. She'ein loima b'asher nitztavino me'es hokel yisborach la'asoisoi, that which were commanded by God to do, she'e knas b'shum ponim. And then he's basically saying that if the mitzvah will be miyad, then it will be a regular mitzvah. But since it only depends upon the knas, after the Amida Bedin, it's not a mitzvah gila. And what does he mean? That a mitzvah, which is not a mitzvah gila, is a din. Mitzvah timna kechol adinim shemona rav goyin mitzvahs gerushin. What does he mean? That dinim, where the mitzvah is Hashem is barach, the mitzvah is a mitzvah muchletes, and there's a kiyum. If it's a din, it's not a mitzvah muchletes, and there's no kiyum. It's only a din. Exactly what I told you over a few weeks ago in Tov Kuf Tzadiches for the Minchas Chinuch. Then in dinim, there's no kiyum. I'll just give you a mashal. If there are two people over here and they're on the way to Eibifnei, the Bezdin Shomayla, one of them, they both have the same schuyos, but Mr. X, he knocked out the tooth of his eved, and he was meshach his eved. And Mr. Y didn't do it. So one has more schuyas than the other memes than the other. There's no kiyum, there's no schus. It's just what you're supposed to do. It's a knas. The Ramban can't imagine that someone who has the toes trains him to do X, and he does it, he has more schuyas than someone who never was involved in it. But however, Rabbi said, there's something also very important over here. The Ramban is being machadish that gerushin is also a din. It's not a mitzvah muchletes, but it's a din. Kachol hadinim, he writes, kachol hadinim shemon harav going mitzvahs gerushin. Exactly like the Minchas Chinuch, who's an example of a din, like Toyim Benita, and he calls gerushin. So it means that the Ramban is the source of all the Minchas Chinuch, the whole business. And the Minchas Chinuch writes like this: Yedua the Yiva Mitzvah say lo kamo gerushin v'toyim v'nitan ukedoyme Tov Kuf Tzadiches. The dine a mitzvah, heima mitzvah, lisnayekach. It's just that's where you're supposed to act. Avol eno mekayim mitzvah klal. Rak kan. In Yibo mekayim a mitzvah to mabur the Aseh dechalisa. There's no Aseh dechalisa in a din because there's no kiyum. I just want to suggest, if you're assuming that Shichur is antithetical to Avdus and Gerushin is antithetical to Kedushin, so it means then that the mitzvah of Olam Tavoidu is lahachzik him as an Evet K'nani. And then the mitzvah of Kedushin Nesuin is lahachzik isha b'nesuin. So the mitzvah is not the Maisa Kedushin Nesuin by itself. And that's why maybe it's a din min adinim, because since it's antithetical to another mitzvah, you can't imagine it being a kima mitzvah. It's only a din. The Ramban equates shichra to gerushin. Lule dvorov, I would have said that you shouldn't equate the two. If there's an amida bedin, is there a mitzvah l'olabem tavodu? It's just that the mitzvah of shichra is antithetical to the mitzvah of l'olabem tavodu, or no? After the amida bedin, there's no mitzvah lahachzik him as an eved. But there's a mitzvah of shichra, so it's not antithetical. However, maybe the Ramban is actually saying that it is antithetical, because he goes, maybe that's what he means, that the shichra eved is a tashlum of the hapola shein va'ayin, and it means that it's not chinam. So maybe the mitzvah of l'olam tavodu still exists, but it's only a heter of that it's not chinam. So I would have said that the mitzvah is poka. And that's what I was assuming before. The Ramban, I think, assumes that the mitzvah alone but tavodu still exists. And by Kedushin, it's certainly so. He's mitzvah, and all the dinim of Nisuin apply until he gives the get. And she's married. And he can change his mind and go back, and everything's okay. Even if he had decided to change his mind. Okay. I thought that the Ramban is amazing in terms of what you can learn out from it. See, in the Rambam, certainly, in the case of a Polish Shein V'ayin, there's no mitzvah anymore. That's the way he says. There's a steer in Psukim. There's one pasuk that says L'olam Tavodu, and the other pasuk that says V'yoytze B'Shein V'ayin, and there's no Kos Shlishi, and it means the following: that the mitzvah is Shalom B'Mokom Shein V'ayin. The Ramban learns no, that the Taki is still a mitzvah, but the Shichur Shein V'ayin is not a matnas chinam. An amazing thing, because it's tashlumin of the Apollo Shein V'ayin. The Rambam disagrees with the Ramban categorically when it comes to gerushin, because the Rambam says in Mitzvah Say Reish Chof Beis, when he talks about the Mitzvah's gerushin, he calls it alamal. He doesn't call it a shran. And this sivui is shenditz tavinu legarish b'sefer dafka im shenitz legarish. If it comes to a situation that we want to megarish, then the mitzvah is to do it with a sefer. And the Rambam surrounds it with mitzvahs which are dinim, and here he says alama. In Reish Chof, the din mafate, which is a din. And in Reish Chof Aleph, there's din yefas toya. And in Reish Chof Gimel, there's din seita. And here he says, engage as an alama. So the Rambam is going, is diametrically opposed to the Ramban, that the Rambam learns there's a mitzvah of gerushin. That's when one wants to terminate the issues, you should do it dafka with the sefer. Where shichra eved is only a din. The L'olam Tavod is only a din, and the din says that there's no L'olam Tavodu in this case. The Mashach. Now, one other point in Ramban. Ramban is mamish moli v'kodesh. Each word is like an amazing, amazing thing. Let me read you this. V'nitztavinu oid shim napil eshino o es eno yiyeh ben chorin umuta b'bas Yisrael. What's the Ramban? Is you telling you Likutei Dinim that with the shicha is muta bas Yisrael? What the Ramban saying is the etzem mitzvah of shicha, which is the mafkia avdus, is not only mafkia avdus, but mafkia it's koilel the hafkor of the Isra Chasnus with a bas choyr or bas Yisrael. And if you look at the Ramban carefully, the pashtus is that the hete in bas choyrim, the hete in bas Yisrael, is gufa the mitzvah to mafkili avdus. With the hafkor shem evet, there's a het in bas Yisrael. This is gufa. The tashlum, it's the hafkor shem evet, which has within it a hete to marry a bas Yisrael, to completely obliterate the shem evet. Rabbi said this means one thing, that the hete in Evet K'nani is through shichra by itself and doesn't require a second tefillah. In Evet, there are two tefillahs. There's one tefillah, the Shem Avdus, which is mixes gerus, and there's another tefillah after the shichot to complete the gerus. And you get the impression, before the second tefillah, this Evet is mutter in Bas Yisrael. You find this in Chedusha Rabbi Chaim Alevi, in Hilchos Yisui Bia, Perik Yud Gimel Aloch Yud Beis. Ulefi zeh harei nicha, hod de meshucha koiden tefillah havi bal kiddushin. That if you're meshachar in Evet, even before the second tefillah, he's a bal kiddushin. The Evet v'shivcha einen bekiddushin, mevur bekiddushin daf samach ches omen aleph. To who mikro the amadoim lechamo. The of course kiddushin Evet is because he's an amadoim lechamo. What does that mean? V'hach the amadoim lechamo who din mesuyim umitosav be'avodim madelesa gam benoch. To bezen nichlal gam hodi Evet elochis. Evet has no relationship to anyone because Amadoim lechamo, and Nochi does. But Nochi yesh lochis to move kiddushin daf gizayin on base. The Nochi yorish is of Torah. Yes, v'chei mavur lehedi before b'samach beis man aleph. Toile bonim b'giyusay yotzi yedei kiri b'rivir. If both of them are gaya, b'shum yesh lochis. Mashen can be Evet, the ein lochis, the kiva the havidin mitosef machbes avdus. This din that Evet shein lochis is because of the shem Evet. Because before, when he was a pasha to go, he had chiyus. Al kain memela amrin לעניין זה, בשיחו לבד, חייז דינו ליוס כישראל. You mafkia this whole din Shem Evet of the Amadim al-Chamo. And the Amadim al-Chamo has limited two dinim. Evet ein lo chiyus, and that he's not a Baal Kiddushin. And that's what Chaim adds. Bahavi Baal Kiddushin. Af klidim tefillah. V'ein lo imadakati lo yeha meshucha Baal Kiddushin mishum chson geirus kiva denochi gam kein in a Baal Kiddushin. He's not worse than the goy. The lezeh ahani hodi alfirin li eved below lo meisha techashetach nishtachre ein bezeh mishum chson geirus. The hekesh to isha. He basically has Kish Yisrael, but ukeri chazina degam be eved gufa. Hod the loitavsin bo kedushin who rak mishum time of the amadim lechamo av chson geirus enkan. The even beshucha din chson geirus el legabe hanach dinim hayiseim al isha. The chson that he needs the second tefillah are those din which are nitaisiv. With the second tefillah, the second tefillah are for the dins and nitaisiv of an isha al isha. The v'zeh reading keep l'snayu ba'avodim. Memela have dino tibitzias ve'avdol Yisrael so tefillah v'geirus v'lo yizulas koshis boy. So that's an amazing thing. So but that's the Ramban says that with the shicha is mutam basis. Now next. Just since we're talking so much about Shirano and Alama, Rabbi Yeshua Nogid talks about a Shirano Hatzivui Baskomo, V'eino Hechrechis. There's no, you're not obligated to do it al poponim. This is a very difficult definition, because if that's the case, you should compare it to mezuzah. If you don't have a house, you're not mechuyev. As the Ram says in Ilchus Brachos, Perigirav Halacha Beis, Yesh Mitzvas Aseh she'odem chayev l'shtadel l'udov ad she'aseh oisa k'goyin tefillin v'sukkah v'lulav v'shofar ve'el nikum chayva. לפי שאדם חייב על כפורם לעשות. יש מצווה שאינו חייב, אלא דוימן לרשוס, וגויים מזוזו מעקה. שאין אדם חייב לשגויים, בבייס, החייב מזוזה, כדי שיעשה מזוזה. אלא אם רוצה לשגויים, כל יומוב באויל, או בספינו ישן. וכן אינו חייב לבנוס בייס, כדי לעשות מעקה. So it's not like Micah, because Micah mezuzah ha'alama. They're not shiram. So the word hechrechis is very poor. Doesn't mean the same as mezuzah. So the kavon of shiran is the din, a way a person should act, and there's no kiyum, as we said. And it's got Soina Taylor, it's a raw. There's no kiyum in our forest Nedorim or our Torah Nedorim. And there's no kiyum in the Dini Tumah. But the din is that someone who's nitmeh, he should be noig with the Dini Tumah. The Rabbi Yeshua Nogid also at the end of his tshuva, the tshuva is on mitzvah tzadihei, in the mitzvah forest the dome. Kivanti b'chol mokoy shehi oimer chuka shirano. He gam dikresivoy kivet shehi mitzvah saseh. It's either a chuka and it's a tzivoy. So the question is, what is this? I'm not sure what it means. And if it's Rishus, the Rambam is trying to say that mitzvahs are tzivuyim, as he says in Shiur Shmini. All I just said, that it's an inferred tzivui from a din, from a Rosh HaTorah, has a different inyan of tzivui. It's not a tzivui muchlak, as a tzivui which the Torah clearly says amal. It's a inferred or implied tzivui. But it's not, let me say like this. There could be an inferred tzivui, which is an amount. Like, for example, the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash, I think it's mitzvah Chav Beis, where the tzivui is atov ve'aron itov. There's no verb, but it's atov. It means the Torah, you see from the words, that the Torah clearly wants that he should do something. That can be, you can have an inferred tzivui, which is an amah. But here, where there's no clear tzivui, it's just religious law. But we know that the Ritzayin HaTorah is that if the Torah has religious law, you should act according to religious law. That inferred tzivui is a shran. The Ramban, the Rav once said over from his father, and I found it in a letter which is not published, that the Rav wrote it himself, the father. I'm not sure who said it exactly, or where it came from, because he didn't say, I heard it from you, and he wrote a letter to the father. I don't know. That the Rambam Mitzvah say it's not symmetric. Lavim or Isuim. Mitzvah say are not sivuyim, but the Yonei Torah. And that's how Rav Moshe explains, Moshe Levi Salvation explains that the mitzvahs tumah are minyan mitzvahs. There's no tzivui, but it's inyan Torah. The Ramban definitely doesn't learn like that, because the Ramban has he counts all the dinim at the end of minyan mitzvahs in the minyan. His discussion in Mitzvah Sarihei, what he calls Rishus Gomer, whatever that means, it means that it's just a postulate necessary for another mitzvah or something else. That's a different issue. But it's not a polemic whether it is in Yonei Torah or not in Yonei Torah. So Ramban definitely doesn't. And I assume the Rambam also, because having a Shiur Shmini, the mitzvahs are basically tzivuyim, you cannot have such a postulate if mitzvah say in Yonei Torah. Okay. Next, we'll start this mitzvah. Let's get us rolling here a little bit. Just tell me an introduction next week. Mitzvah Mitzvah Reish Lamed Vov. Mitzvah Sheish Ushleishu Masayim. He shetzivonu. Here it's al tashriya, like a shrana. It's clearly a hoyra'ah. Bedin choyvel b'chaveira. Vu amra yis'ale v'chirivan anoshim v'hika ish Esrael. V'zu hi anik shetikra dine knoses. Ukfar bo hakosuf shehu koilo Dine Knos Kulam means all of them. What does it mean, all of them? It's all the five of Boishes, Nezek, Sar, Ripu, Yesheves, Bom Yisala, Kashya Osa, Kain Yeosa Loy. Great some Bezeh. She Yilkach Mimamoinoi, Tmuras Mashetzialo. Tsar, Lefi Shiur, Tsar, Lechavitzila Chavera. Moshe Boba Kabbalah, it's very important, a Kabbalah. There's a Kabbalah over here of what Ayin Tachas Ayin is, shame, what the Tashlumen are. Bafil Lo Hoya, Ella Bishoy Levad. It's also B'chal Choyvel. Hine Hu Yikones B'mamoinoi, or I think that Kapach says it's Yif Yipoigim Boy B'mamoinoi Kefi Ashir Ahu. Okay. So the mitzvah is the din of Choyvel B'Chaveiroi. The da shedini knos elu kulom kloima niske odem ba'odem. So dine knos kulom is niske odem ba'odem, is odem achover b'chavera. V'chein kishizika behema es ha'odem o es ha'behema. Ibn Tibben es ha'odem o ha'odem es ha'behema. Kishizika behema es ha'odem o ha'odem es ha'behema. Okay. So in Ibn Tibben, there's something there that's not in Kapach. The question is Odem Amazik Momun Azulas. Where does that fall in Sefer Mitzvos? It'll be very important to contrast the Rambam over here in Midyan Mitzvos, or maybe not to contrast, or to look in the Rambam, the Protei Mitzvos, because he calls Hilchos Choyvel Mazik. And the Hilchos Choyvel Mazik in Protei Mitzvos is not only the Kabbalah, but also the Mazik Shabbat. If you look in the beginning of Hilchos Choyvel Mazik, he says like this: Mitzayachas bihi din Choyvel Chaveiroi o Mazik Mamoinah. So I'm not sure if the din is Mazik Mamoinah, whether you would call the mitzvah by definition dine knoses. We have to think about what the relationship between Mishnah Torah and Sefer Mitzvos. Then he says, Hine lo yadunu bohem v'yiknesu. That's a very poor translation in Ibn Tibben. In Kapach, it's v'yifsek Zulas bezdin hasmuchin be'eretz Yisrael kisvayad. It's be'eretz. So I don't understand. Is it Gemara's that there's, we have no idea why he's bringing in mazik behema es ha'odam, or odam es behema, or mazik behema es ha'odam, or es behema. But the din is that it's only bezin asmuchim ba'aretz. Aren't the whole sugis throughout the Gemara, throughout Shas of Shlichusayu? What does all this mean? Then we'll look at another mitzvah, the mitzvah of Lodem B'Shor, and he quotes two psukim: V'chiyigach Shor, V'chiyigov Shor, ish Eshor Re'eu. It's kedai. Look at these two psukim and decide what they're talking about. We'll pick this up in Mitzvah next week.